Hello YouTube, this is the Villa Farnese in Italy, which at one time belonged to the family of the popes of Italy, I believe. This is the original front entrance, and it was built in around 1521, and it has a 6-hour clock, as this video by Pro Walk Tours tells us. And I'll put this video in my playlist for March, which I will make public shortly, and you can have a look at all the crazy stuff I've been researching to make these videos. And when we look at the villa from above, we can see that it appears to sit on the outline of a star fort, and these star forts are all around the world, and very mysterious who actually originated this design, or indeed at what time many of them were actually constructed. And the bottom part of the construction actually appearing as though it may possibly be older than the rest of it. And I wanted to open with that because today I wanted to talk about attribution of various massive buildings, and who was the Emperor Hadrian. Well, we're told that he assumed control of the Roman Empire in AD 117 following the death of his adoptive father Trajan. Just a little addendum here. The Emperor Trajan died in AD 117, having not named a successor. It was announced that he had been adopted as Trajan's son before the emperor's death the day after. So, although there were rumours that this was fake, so very trustworthy guys, these Italians. Now, Trajan is the guy who built the column, famously, and this is a piece of Roman construction, and you can see what the Romans were capable of here. None of this is really on a very massive scale. You can see that the column is actually made up of many smaller blocks rather than being one large chunk of cut stone as the earlier obelisks that we find from Egypt often were. And the mystery being, how did we have the ability to do such work and then later have to make something like this out of smaller pieces? So Emperor Hadrian comes along, and rather than expansion, he's more concerned, we are told, with shoring up the borders of the Roman Empire. Yeah, this is the guy who allegedly builds Hadrian's Wall, which we'll come to in a bit. So Hadrian comes along and he does all kinds of building works, and here's one alleged construction Hadrian gets credit for, which is the Castle Sant'Angelo, also known as Mausoleum of Hadrian, because it's supposedly commissioned by Emperor Hadrian as a mausoleum for himself and his family. And where have we seen this story before, where if historians are not sure what something is, they just say, oh, it was a tomb for somebody. And I'm not convinced that this was built to be somebody's tomb. This is what it looks like now. Clearly a defensive position or fortress here, and indeed we're told in history that it was used as a defensive position later in its existence, and supposedly it didn't start out looking like this. Here at one time we are told that it would have had a more kind of classical appearance, as we can see here, this even looking like it's trying to look like some kind of old photograph, which it's clearly not, and I don't think that this place ever actually looked like this. And when we look at the Google Maps, we can clearly see that this place is also built on the footprint of an ancient star fort. And it's not that clear from modern maps, guys, but when you look at an older map, it's clear as day that this was a star fort here in the middle of Rome. Please excuse my rambling on, but here's another building not constructed by Hadrian, but rather dedicated to him by the emperor who came after him, his son, who was another adopted kid. And these columns look so weathered. The entire building looks so weathered, more so than things that we find in Egypt that were supposedly done much earlier. And is this just because of climatic conditions, or what is actually going on here? And the Villa Adriana, and again, very difficult to say what is actually going on here, and if this was actually done by the Romans in the 2nd century, or are we even looking at something earlier? This is Hadrian's Wall, which marked the boundary of the Roman Empire between England and Scotland. And where I lived for many years, in the town of Colchester in Essex, was at one point the capital of Roman Britain. We have a Roman wall around the town, and as you can see, it looks absolutely nothing like Hadrian's Wall, and a totally different kind of construction with mortar between smaller blocks here, and some of it even being filled in by brick, which is presumably later on. And was this done because they simply didn't have the stone to build this kind of construction here, Or was Hadrian's wall already there when the Emperor Hadrian came along? Again, the whole thing just doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense. Here, the town of Colchester and Colchester Castle, which is not Roman, we are told, but built on the site of an earlier Roman temple, possibly using some of the building materials left over from the Roman temple being burnt down by the Celts and Queen Boudica. Of course, if you want to go and look up the history on that, there's been various movies, TV shows, and this building, we are told, is considered to be somewhat similar to the White Tower at the Tower of London, built by William the Conqueror, but in fact looks nothing similar at all, really, and in fact looking like a Roman construction, if anything. And we are told that this is what was originally on the site, and this is what the town would have looked like with the Roman wall. I assume this is where you can still see a bit of the Roman gatehouse still standing, and you can see the Roman or possibly Saxon buildings a bit later on looking pretty basic here. And then of course the wall here, because I guess the Romans are worried about the Celts coming to burn them and kill them, and yet they were somehow able to construct this massive stone temple in the middle of Colchester. And I just don't think this ever existed, guys. I'm still piecing this together, but yeah, not sure. And here, another, possibly the most impressive thing sometimes attributed to Hadrian, although to the time of Hadrian, sorry, although there's some debate here on the Wikipedia. And of course, don't take Wikipedia for a reliable source, but this is the Pantheon in Rome, and possibly one of the most impressive buildings of the ancient world. Conveniently, they tell us on the front of the building who is supposed to have constructed it. And the question I have here is, was this all done at the same time, or are parts of it older than we are told? And as you can see, some debate here amongst the historians, because Lisa Hetland argues that the present construction began under Trajan, and the building is known to have been destroyed by fire several times. Here, the dome above the what would have originally been some sort of temple, we assume, and clearly taken with some kind of panoramic lens, so you can see in other photos here that these parts with the triangular shapes here actually are built straight up, and then the dome rising to a majestic point at the top, letting natural light into the building, and just an amazing piece of architecture that was not replicated even in terms of anything close until Brunelleschi builds the dome in Florence during the Renaissance. I think it was Brunelleschi. Let me check that. And the argument that some people want to make here is that, while some of this Roman stuff may be left over from an earlier pre-disaster civilization, when the rest of the world civilization gets wiped out at some point, Rome seems to survive better than a lot of other places do, and civilization is then rebuilt from there. And the castle at Colchester, we are told, not constructed until the year 1100, and so we are to believe that this place was just pretty much left abandoned after the Roman temple being burnt down for 1,000 years. And again, pretty much nothing happens here for 1,000 years. And very strange if our chronology of history that we're told is correct. And another interesting detail about the Pantheon here is that there is an Egyptian obelisk attributed to Ramesses II standing outside the building. Two absolutely amazing pieces of ancient construction here, possibly with a Roman temple added later in front of it. Oh, and another point of interest, inside the Pantheon meaning it's a place dedicated to many different gods. The Greek word theos, from which we get Pantheon, can also mean superhuman. So perhaps some precursor civilization who would seem superhuman to us, and what this is actually depicting here, it's explained away as some sort of Christian iconography, but I don't think it is. I think it's actually something that we see in ancient Egypt, in Egyptian art, quite often, of Isis and Horus, with Horus being the child here, not looking much like a child at all, but actually a full-grown person with another giant here. And is this a commemoration of literal giants who existed in prehistory, or is it metaphorical, simply referring to the giant achievements of this earlier lost civilization? And another very interesting depiction of what appears to be a grown man with a giant, found here in this YouTube video from the Shikods family, and I'll leave that in my playlist for March if anyone wants to go and look at that as well. Another interesting video.